populate this barracks room with way too many people. Thank you very much. Professionally, this is the year 4.
Oh, really?
I've been around here since
There we go. Thank you. Yes, sir. Ah.
I appreciate that compliment a lot. Thank you. For those who are coming in now, come over to this side of the room. That Well, we lock the doors at night. If you're here, you're here. We don't mind. You'll set off the alarms, and a nice NRP officer will come and find you and escort you out. And once he's done producing paper and you're supporting the Maryland Park Service, we're good to go. Well, welcome to the barracks room. I'm going to try not to do too much talking. I want for you all to ask me questions. What do you want to know? What strikes your fancy? What's something that's...
How many people would this room contain?
That is an awesome question. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 beds divided in 4 bunks. 2 men per bed. Now, we're modern people. We need our own space. You Victorians, you Civil War people, you need your privacy. You need your own space. In the 18th century, most Marylanders lived in a house that was about the size of this room, if not a bit smaller, especially out here on the frontier. So your privacy may actually be your side of the bed. So having 2 men per bed is not unusual. That may actually be something nice for you. Each barracks was assigned equipment. So each bed had a mattress. Each bed had a bolster and a blanket, and that was to go over it. Over the 2, each man would have his own blanket as well. So this barracks room would hold 16 men. There are 6 of these in the building. I believe that totals 96, and that is the number of enlisted men in a Maryland company of foot. So the barracks fits its use because each one of these was to hold 100 men normally. So again, both sides were barracks. The governor's house, that 3rd building, is where the officers lived. Except for the first winter, that building didn't exist. These were the only 2 buildings. What else?
Did the officers share beds too?
Probably not. Now, one of the fun things about officers is you had to provide your own bed. So officers in most cases had to bring their own equipment with them. One of the officers passed away well after the war, and in his probate inventory, a lot of the items we can track back to his military service. He has a red uniform. He has certain equipment that's for military use. So it's helpful for us to reproduce what was here. What we used to reproduce these rooms are what Henry Bouquet, serving with the Royal Americans, wanted for his barracks rooms in Philadelphia. So for numbers of men this size, that bedding, you'll see on the tables the crockery that was wanted for each room, a kettle, a frying pan for each room. So these would be assigned to the barracks. In theory, there's an officer here who serves as the barracks master. And if you were the corporal in charge of this squad, you would literally have to sign for all the equipment in this room. And if it was destroyed, missing, or lost, you were going to have to pay the price. Something's never changed, yes.
Are these were replaced in the 20s?
This entire building was rebuilt just before the bicentennial. All the buildings were gone probably sometime very shortly after the American Revolution. Even before that, we believe the doors and windows were scavenged out of it. So when it became a prisoner of war camp, they had to be put back in. in the 1970s, gearing up for the bicentennial. It's hard to believe we're 50 years from that, isn't it? They did archaeology, and of course back then archaeology was looking for foundations. It wasn't so much all the cool little stuff around that foundation, it puts it in context. Plus this place was also dug by the Civilian Conservation Corps before that. So these buildings were rebuilt on the foundations of the original. They were within 2 weeks of setting up 1.5-story log buildings. And the historian for the Maryland Park Service was rummaging through some boxes in Annapolis and found the Hughes letter, which was written during the American Revolution, which talks about 2-story clapboard buildings. So that's why we have 2-story clapboard buildings. Now, these beams, if Governor Sharp would have been given these beams, he would have had the carpenters soundly thrashed, because they are not correct. They are way too chipped up. But in the 1970s, they used circular saws to cut the lumber for this barracks. And as we all know, they didn't exist at that time for mass production. So they gave the seasonal interpreters and the seasonal employees baseball shin guards and adzes and said, hack them up, boys. They were all guys at that time, sorry ladies. So they're way too hacked up. If you look at the lintel above that fireplace, that's a much better representation. You're all right. A much better representation of hand hewn.
Yeah.
So, as Pat said, they're hiring carpenters, professionals to build this fort. That's one of the neat things about this place. It's not really a soldier-built fort. They are helping as part of the labor. They don't have to construct it.
In those days, how was the fort supplied? Was it supplied by the river from Frederick?
It's supplied
or-
mainly by road. What's
Road.
now Route 56 is a major is a road that goes out to about 4 miles from here. Then it returns to an Indian trail. So the wagons are coming from Annapolis. A lot are coming down out of Pennsylvania. Route 11, you guys will be going down that way. That's a major 18th century road, the Great Philadelphia Wagon Road. Most of the supplies are being brought in from the east. The Potomac River is funny. It's not today what it was then. The C&O Canal has botched the river up for its 18th century appearance. Dams were put on the river to supply water to the canal. So Governor Sharp actually will take a canoe up to Fort Cumberland from here, and he wants to see what it's like. It's getting way too shallow. They do actually bring 60 wagon loads of munitions here to supply Forbes' campaign, because this is going to be where Forbes starts. Doesn't happen that way, but they start taking it up the river in bateaus and big canoes, and by the time they get up there, it's summer, they have to drag the boats back. So the waterway is not the best way. During times of flood, it's good, but wagons. And what's kind of neat is Governor Sharp actually writes about east of Fort Frederick, the wagons can carry so much. West of Fort Frederick, they have to lighten their load because the roads are so bad. So if supplies are brought here and being sent further west, they literally have to put it onto multiple more wagons to run it west of here, so the wagons, don't break down. What else?
They have magazine somewhere?
Yes, in theory, the Governor Sharp actually talks about magazines, military storage places. I think you're thinking about a powder magazine. Yes, so I like to be specific, and I want to make sure I'm talking about what you want to talk about.
Time.
What's that?
Time.
Time.
Magazine.
Time magazine? No. Any other questions? That bastion over there, we believe, did have earth fill in it. The Civilian Conservation Corps found an area just kind of on the right side of it that had a shale kind of trail going into it. And we think the magazine may have been built into that bastion, not so much below ground. The Civilian Conservation Corps was a wonderful thing, and it also was a horrible thing when it came to preservation of the property and that. They actually dug trenches across the property to try to find the foundations and things, and they literally were putting artifacts in boxes, and when the archaeologists showed up 2 weeks later, we're all adults, nobody's filming, right? The archaeologist literally lost his S. He went ballistic. He wrote the nicest 1930s cursing letter to the camp commandant saying, this is not right, this is not good. So they literally took each one of the CCC boys and said, okay, where did you find this cannonball? And he said, I think I dug it over there. And we have X's on a map.
Oh, man.
So yeah, so it does, the story actually is not that bad. It does kind of show a lot of stuff on the parade ground, which more likely is Revolutionary War than it is French and Indian War, because they did build huts on the parade ground for some of the captives here. All right, what else?
So as far as an armory then, as opposed to a magazine?
There is an armorer.
Uh-huh.
We don't know of an armory.
Oh, do they keep their weapons?
There's
within here?
a rack here. One of the things that Bouquet wanted in each one of the barracks rooms was a rack. That way, if you need to turn out, you literally go. Now, most of us, when we get home, we simply throw everything wherever our wife lets us throw it, or husband, or whatever, and then we go to sleep. These guys literally would have had to put everything where it belonged. Their packs were packed. Their clothes were ready to get into. So that way they could turn out at a moment's notice. There is reference to a guard room here, or a guard house here. There's no evidence of a building, so it may have simply been a room, and we represent that by the end room here. So if this squad of inspection, if half of them were on guard duty, they would leave this room and go to that room, so that when they're changing the guard in the middle of the night every so many hours, they don't wake up the rest of the barracks. So that's the guard room. We show that as the guard room down there. But again, in theory, there should be buildings on either side of the gateway when you look at 18th century fort construction, but there doesn't seem to be buildings built there. Yes, sir.
Should there have been I guess a wooden parapet all the way around the wall so that they could fire over the wall and so on?
There should have been some sort of fighting position, but Fort Frederick's never finished. So we think at least that bastion and the one opposite had earth fill in it, about 16 feet deep from the wall. And then that magazine, the powder magazine, would have been in that one. And the other bastions may have had fighting positions in them. And you could actually defend this entire fort from those four corners. You don't need people in the curtain walls. And Governor Sharp said it was to be it was to be a fort faced with stone. So we're thinking that there's enough space for earth fill on the inside. Yes, sir.
What was diet like? I see some of the bread and all here, and the scurvy issue.
Soldiers are to receive a poundish of meat, a pound of bread, a pint of peas or beans. Vinegar is also issued to help with scurvy. They're also issued butter, salt, things like that periodically as well. Some as part of the individual ration, some as part of the group ration. Usually they're divided into messes of 6 to 8 men. So of course half this room could be a mess. There is a baker here who is hired to bake bread. That's why Pat has painstakingly worked on this oven and is perfecting his bread recipes.
Nice.
So he's going to be Christopher Ludwig for the American Revolution. If you don't know who Christopher Ludwig is, look him up. It's one of those great Revolutionary War stories that nobody knows about. One of the instrumental people in the American Revolution, the American Army. So the diet here is fairly decent. Some forts will build gardens outside for the officers. Raystown up in New York, up in Pennsylvania, there are fields of turnips and fields of cabbage grown outside the fort. We don't have any evidence of any of that here. There's a ton of corn being brought to this fort. We think it's fodder for the horses that were brought here as well. They're privately owned by teamsters. In fact, one of the men who took a message up to Pennsylvania, they had to rent the horse that he was riding, and we know this because the horse was shot by an Indian. The guy survived, but they had to reimburse them for the horse. So, yes, sir.
It's an impressive fort, and given the width of Maryland in this area, it's easy to see how it could defend Maryland, but it doesn't take a military genius to realize that one could march a few miles into Pennsylvania or West Virginia, get around it. So was there a discussion, or at least or cooperation with the other colonies to set up a more linear form of defense?
Well, there is a linear form of defense. When you guys look at this mountain range west of us, you can start in New Jersey and go down into the Carolinas, and there are defensive forts along what I call the back of the frontier. This is not the frontier, but what they're defending are this valley, this very productive valley that you've got to go. I think you have to say you're going up into it because it actually gets higher. That Route 11, they're protecting in here. Maryland soldiers did not sit here and wait for the enemy. Governor Sharp said he wanted a third of the men always out ranging. My job title includes the word ranger. It's not a new job title. In the 17th century, there were rangers in Maryland. Now, unfortunately, their job was not a very nice one. It was to remove the indigenous people and hunt runaway enslaved people. So it's kind of a difficult task that we have to face, but it's part of our lineage is to patrol. It took me a long time when I transitioned from a museum person to a ranger person to say driving a truck around looking at stuff was work, because that's patrolling or ranging. So there were always men leaving this fort ranging, and in fact there's a great Maryland Gazette article that talks about a group of men leaving this fort with some of the Cherokee allies and literally going up into Pennsylvania and following tracks, visiting a camp, coming back down west of here, and then coming back to Fort Frederick. So yes, they are cooperating, they are working together. That young guy, Washington, who was a nice big old redhead when he was here, one of the things he kept trying to do was saying that Pennsylvania and Maryland, you don't want to go through there to the British Army. You want to go use that road that I built a few years ago to help Braddock when Forbes's campaign comes. So we aren't real fans of Washington here because he doesn't say nice things about Maryland and our fort here. But both forts tend to fall into both roads are now into disuse because Forbes's campaign will actually go through Pennsylvania. It's now Route 30.
Did Washington do his surveying in the years just prior to the French and Indians, so he knew this area?
I'm not sure how much time he spent in this area. I know he was out in here. I live in Jefferson County, West Virginia, which has a whole bunch of Washington properties in it, mostly his relatives.
Right.
So he was out. We have an indication that Washington may have been here for one day.
Okay.
He came to poach the Cherokee and try to get him to go back to Virginia, because when the Cherokee stopped at the fort there in Winchester, the Virginians weren't ready to receive them, and they came up here and the Marylanders were. So they end up trying to come back and get him to go back.
So he was surveying when he was like 18 years old, and he knew the land pretty well. That's probably why Braddock
He
picked
was learning
him.
it, yes. Yeah, but here's the hard history, kids. Here's the hard history. One of the reasons he was surveying land and doing also to get occupation, but also Western expansion. He was part of the Ohio Company. They owned millions and millions of acres to the west of here. And there was a proclamation line made right after this war that said, you can't go west of here. Guess where a lot of their land was? West of there.
Yeah.
Possible cause of the American Revolution? I don't know, maybe. Just a thought. So yeah, things don't change. Folks want to keep developing. Tidewater, Virginia was completely played out. The tobacco crop had destroyed the land there. It was moving out into the Piedmont of what's now Western Virginia and West Virginia and Maryland. So you're starting to see enslaved people being brought out here, separated from family in the Tidewater. You're starting to see the folks who lived here beforehand being told, go to the west, keep moving away, go to the Ohio country, we don't like you here anymore. So this war, this French and Indian War, we don't often get time to talk about it, but it's a clash of culture, it's a clash of religion, Catholic versus Protestant, American, British, French colonial, unnumbered American Indian tribes. So yes, it's definitely a clash. All right, Pat kept yelling 5 minutes, but I'm waiting for Rob to stop talking to let you guys go outside. Any other thoughts or questions?
And roughly, what is an Indian population around here at the time?
0.
Okay.
Really?
Yeah, by 1730, Shawnee Old Town, which is Old Town, Maryland, was abandoned. So there are no American Indians living in this area. And in fact, this area was never an area of settlement. It was an area of migration. When the river was running with fish during the shad runs and things like that, come here and fish, smoke fish, take that back with you. It's a transient spot. So they're living more west and north of here. So yeah, but yes, we can safely say there were some American Indians on reservations in eastern Maryland at this time, but out here, they've been pushed out. All right, any other thoughts? All right, we're gonna get Rob started. The problem is we don't get to talk very much this time of the year about history. So when we start, it's hard to stop. So, and with a group like you guys, this is a target-rich environment. You know? So we like to share. And I love the fact that you all drove the program. So go drive Rob crazy too. All right.
Thank you.
Okay.